Hello everyone, I'm Nico. We're going to call this show Ordinance just because it sounds cool. We're talking about Bitcoin stuff. I'm joined today with our first guest. We got Robin from Liquidium. Effectively Ordinal Lending on Bitcoin. If you want to introduce yourself, Robin, and maybe give a little intro to Liquidium to begin with.
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Robin, CEO and co-founder of Liquidium, and Liquidium is pretty much just a borrowing and lending protocol on ordinals. We're the market leader in the space when it comes to just like using an ordinal as collateral and then borrowing and lending native Bitcoin against it. And I think like just to explain some use cases to make more clear sort of what it's about is like, let's say you have a node monkey in your wallet, which obviously is worth a lot, but you need liquidity in order to buy something else or whatever. You can just use your node monkey as collateral, borrow money, or if you're on the other side of the spectrum and you have like a lot of Bitcoin sitting around, you want to earn yield on your Bitcoin, you can lend out your Bitcoin to borrowers and then sort of earn interest on your Bitcoin. Yeah, that's what it's about.
One little question I have on that is like when I was testing around with Liquidium was like it seemed that like the lending period is still pretty like short, right? So if say you wanted to, let's say you had a no monkey, it's worth a lot. Let's say you want to go and kind of lend that out so you have liquidity to then go make a trade. You're obviously kind of right now it seems like limited within like a week period, right? Um,
Correct. Yeah. So the durations for the loans are pretty short, usually between 7 and 14 days or 7 and 16 days. Um, so uh, we are doing very short-term loans because obviously uh, taking Bitcoin loans against an ordinal are considered high-risk loans, and there is still a lot of volatility in the market. We are going with very short-term loans. So there's like not a huge amount of price fluctuation in the loan, and the loans are considered a little bit safer because it's just shorter duration.
I guess sort of diving like into like deep stuff, but I'm just gonna ask it now because I think it makes sense. We were just talking about before was the fact that I misread it right, but actually 94% of the loans that people are giving out on Liquidium are being repaid, right? That's actually, if you think about it, very impressive, right? That means that pretty much every loan that someone's, you know, offering their ordinal as collateral, like is getting it back, right? And is repaying that loan on time within that short period of time. Like, do you have anything to say about that in terms of like what that means about like the sort of action that's going on in this space? Because I'd say that's a very bullish sign, right?
Yeah, yeah, no, definitely. I think it's a good sign because it also shows that sort of like we are in a phase where ordinal prices keep increasing rather than decreasing. Yeah, like people really they just want to hold on to their ordinals, to their assets, sometimes even their own profile pictures. Like you don't want to the last thing that you want uh to happen to you is that you lose your online identity. And I feel like a lot of people in the space have made one particular ordinal or something their sort of online identity. But let's say like yeah, I used this example before, but we could like really see in phases where, for example, quantum cats were minting or node monkeys were launching and so on and so forth, that people need short-term liquidity because they want to buy into these mints, but they also don't want to sell their ordinals. So that's actually the use case that we're serving, right? Like you can keep your ordinal, you get liquidity, you can trade whatever you want with this liquidity, and then as long as you repay, you will get back your ordinal, and you can keep it like that's really what most borrowers are using it for. And we can see that definitely playing out by the numbers we're seeing.
I think that also kind of what you're saying explains why there is such a high repayment rate, which is that if people are connecting or have as a personal brand for whatever reason these NFTs, then obviously they don't want to potentially default on that loan and lose that ordinal as collateral, right? Because it actually means something to them. I mean, I can even say like I bought a Remilio recently, right? And like I made that my PFP. And like not only has it been very profitable with the Athena airdrop and various other things and the fact they've like doubled in price in the past few weeks, I'm now like trying to think like I see it as like a leveraged ETH long, right? Because it's effectively denominated in ETH. That most likely be worth a couple of ETH at the top of this run. But obviously, when I have to sell it from an actual keeping my money and making the most money standpoint, it's obviously going to be a shame considering once you make it your PFP, you kind of like, becomes a part of you in some way, right? And I think that like people who come from like a gaming background or whatever will understand that more. And that's obviously why there was a lot of like criticism around NFTs, and probably is one of the biggest criticisms around even ordinals today, right? Um, I'll take it back real quickly just because I think it's interesting, right? We met at NFT Paris, and the ordinal hype there and kind of general BTC Eco stuff was like very, very popping, right? And you've just been at NFT NYC, where obviously it would have been, I would imagine maybe even bigger than Paris, right? Just because we're closer to the halvening, we're like 10 days out or so. Um, I'd like to just hear like what your experience was, any highlights, any kind of takeaways that you have at the top of your head.
Yeah, sure, definitely. No, NFT NYC was great. Obviously Paris was also great, but I think um, just European cities are a little bit more conservative in
Bit
general.
more tame.
Paris is similar to that in many degrees. I think Paris is sort of like a fashion city, like a high fidelity art. Like you have the Louvre there, you have like a lot of just like cultural experiences there that have been around for a longer time. And the NFT scene in Paris is already small compared to the traditional fashion and art scene in Paris. And then finding an ordinal niche within this already slow adopting economy or like space
Yeah,
in
niche
Paris.
niche within niche for
Niche
sure. Yeah.
within niche, yeah, exactly. I think that's really hard to find. So I think there were only like two ordinal focused events in Paris, to the best of my knowledge, that I went to at least. But NYC was way more focused on ordinals as well. Like there was an ordinal event every day. We even had like most of the days there were like three or more uh, ordinal focused events going on at the same time, and you sort of had to choose from them and like make a decision of where you want to go. So that was definitely cool to see. And the first time that I saw that since I have been in the ordinal space, which I have been in the ordinal space since February of 2023. So definitely great to see that we are at this point now where there is a very big focus on the different ordinal events. And then also just all of the people that sort of are known in the Ethereum space are also going to these ordinal events now. Like I met a lot of great guys, like for example, Frank Degott, who obviously he has done things with ordinals, but he was really like bullish on ordinals, bullish on Liquidium at that event, which was great to see, and just other people sort of from the Ethereum space that are slowly dripping over and showing more interest in that. So yeah, that's sort of my takeaway from NFT NYC. Great event, great conference.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see, with people like Ansem speaking about puppets recently and stuff like that. When you see Ansem starting to lend out his puppet as liquidity on Liquidium, I think that's when big stuff is coming, right? But I think, yeah, combined with like halving. But I think the interesting thing is about the halving this time is that, and especially with respect to the Bitcoin ecosystem and ordinals, is that although typically it's kind of like a buy the rumor, sell the news. In this case, there's actually a lot of like really strong fundamental stuff launching around it, which should actually keep it going, right? Regardless of what you think is happening in macro and whether in the long term, I think we're all mega bullish, but just in the very short term, like we're seeing a lot of excitation right now around ordinals and general Bitcoin ecosystem. I guess like specifically with regards to runes. Maybe interesting to kind of speak on how you are, look at kind of Liquidium V3. Because I see you guys have support for runes, or coming soon for runes and BRC20s, right? Maybe speak on that, and then also I'd be interested to hear how you kind of see BRCs, like what space do they hold in the sense that once runes come in, is it going to replace them?
Okay, yeah, great question. So, yeah, definitely rune lending is something that we're very excited about and currently like fully focused on. There's like literally nothing else we're working on right now. It's just like every dev on the team is just focused on getting this out as soon as possible. Because I think it will be a huge market to serve, and there is definitely there will definitely be the need for just Rune borrowing and lending. I mean, like, it's not a new innovation or something. Like, obviously it is on Bitcoin, but we have seen this market play out over and over again in the traditional finance world, on all of the other chains. Like, Aave is still one of the most called smart contracts on Ethereum, and so on. So it just makes sense for us as a borrowing and lending protocol that already has the infrastructure on Bitcoin to dabble into more assets and also serve runes, and also BRC20 in the future. And then, yeah, for BRC20 versus runes, I think it's, yeah, I guess, like, interesting how these two things will compare. I honestly don't have a great answer to that. Like, we have seen that runes are more efficient in a way, or like that's the expectation, and I think that's also what we're seeing on testnet, because the key difference is that a BRC20 always needs an inscription, which means, like, essentially in order to transfer a BRC20, you have to inscribe a transfer inscription to your wallet, and then you have to send this transfer inscription to somebody else. And as soon as you transfer it, it gets invalidated. So now, sort of like, person A has 1,000 ordi. Person A wants to transfer 1,000 ordi to person B. So person A inscribes this transfer of 1,000 ordi to person B, sends the transfer inscription to person B. Now the person A doesn't have any ordi anymore. Person B has 1,000 ordi. But now if person B wants to send 1,000 ordi back to person A, they have to inscribe a new transfer and send this to person A. So now both person A and person B have a worthless transfer inscription in their wallet, which will be there forever, and is like
it's
worth
like
nothing.
super inefficient, super wasteful, right? Like, makes no sense.
It's like a one-way ticket, and it's a disposable one-way ticket. And runes just eliminates that because it's UTXO based, and you can just, like, you have an empty op return code in your transactions, where it basically just says, like, this UTXO will transfer X amount, but it's like just 80 bytes of 0 sats, which will not even be stored on nodes because it's an empty UTXO, essentially an orphan UTXO, what we call it, and then sort of just it gets dispersed and it's not there on the chain anymore. It doesn't clog up the chain, doesn't clog up your wallet. So that's pretty cool to see that we do have developments there. But I think, like, I have talked to Domo and the rest of the BRC20 team, or the Layer 0 Foundation, and they definitely have some things cooking as well. Don't want to reveal too much there. I think there could be a very, very nice competition. I think it's good that there is some healthy competition going on, and we sort of progress towards a very good fungible token ecosystem on Bitcoin. And yeah, I think it's not like runes versus BRC20. It's more like Bitcoin versus all of the other chains. Let's make Bitcoin better.
Yeah,
together.
exactly. I mean, maybe my understanding is incorrect, but I think, like, the way I see it is BRCs are still a better solution with regards to, like, being more EVM compatible and other things. I don't know how much runes kind of plays into that or not. To me, it seems like a bit more of an L1 native kind of thing, right? But I agree with you. I think, like, both have their place.
Yeah, I think it will be very, like, both are incompatible with EVM by its nature. I think that there will not be a huge difference in terms of EVM compatibility. Like, there will be stuff for runes as well, but right now, definitely BRC20 just has the compatibility with exchanges, with bridges, with whatever. What has yet to be built for runes, of course.
I think as well, whether it's just part of the narrative or whether it really makes sense, it looks like a lot of ordinal projects who were never really considered token projects necessarily, in a fungible sense, are obviously now looking to, like, all launch runes tokens kind of take advantage of the hype and stuff. Do you think that's kind of a good thing or a bad thing, or do you think they're just kind of taking advantage of the fact that they can release something and raise some more money and these kinds of things?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
In the sense that because of like the fact that runes are basically allowing the creation of like fungible tokens, right? To my knowledge, obviously now a lot of ordinal based collections are, in addition to the ordinals they have, also releasing a runes token effectively, right, for their project. And so like I think like you could argue it's like a bit of a money grab in some ways,
Well,
basically.
I think like what I saw with most of the collections that are dropping runes tokens, they are mostly airdropping these to their holders. So it's basically a form of rewarding early holders, um, because they just get free airdrops and hopefully that's worth something. And I mean, like, it's just a shitcoin, right? Like, there's no
For sure,
value
yeah.
but being a culturally shitcoin. I funnily, I talked to somebody in at NFT NYC. Uh, so she invests into a lot of like Solana shitcoins, and I was like, okay, what's your strategy? Like, what do you invest in? When do you decide that you invest in this shitcoin versus this shitcoin? Like, obviously, you don't do any like sort of like chart analysis or whatever.
Fundamental
She
analysis.
was like just like straight up, no, I don't only care about the memes. Like, if it's good memes, if there are good memes for the shitcoin, I will invest. And like, that's, I think, the culture. And I think the ordinal projects that have good memes going on and like a good just culture, their token will also be a sort of probably uh, a value add to their whole thing because it just adds to the whole degen thing. But yeah, also probably it will be used as money grab in other parts. But yeah,
Yeah,
like,
I guess I'm not saying it's necessarily a super bad thing, right? But I
yeah,
mean, it's definitely good for you guys, right? As a money market, it's just like more forms of collateral, right?
right.
Um, one question I have then in that case is like with regards to the fact that you'll be adding support for runes as collateral. Is there anything else you also want to be adding support collateral wise like down the line, and in terms of like further integrations for Liquidium, right? Like with regards to maybe things like taking your position and using it to restake on another a chain like through Babylon or something like that. I'm sure you guys have like fairly innovative stuff that you're thinking about doing. Um, is there anything you can share on like that at this stage?
Yeah, so think of Liquidium not as this ordinal lending protocol, but more of this one-stop shop for borrowing and lending on Bitcoin. So the idea, really, like the vision behind Liquidium, is that we make everything liquid. Like, that's in the name, right? Like, you come to our protocol, you have any sort of Bitcoin asset, you put it on there and you can get a loan against it, you can get liquidity against it. So that's really the goal here. And obviously that associates that means that we want to serve as many forms of collateral as possible. Because when I was a broke boy on Solana and on Ethereum and so on, and I wanted to use these NFT lending protocols, I was like, damn, all of these NFTs are just worth way too much, and I can't even afford to be a lender, and I can't afford to buy one of these NFTs to be a borrower. So like, that sucks. Like, I can't even use this protocol. So I think for us, like, ideally we will serve as many forms of collateral as possible to let everybody participate in this ecosystem. So yes, absolutely, Runes is coming, BRC20 is coming. We're also looking into other fungible token standards like ARC20 and TAP protocol. There's also
Mm.
rare sets on Ordinals, which is a completely new market that hasn't existed on other chains, and I think which is very interesting to Ordinals. I think rare sets are still very undervalued. Obviously, there aren't a lot of use cases around it yet, but arguably um, there is a value to a very historical special Satoshi. So I think that's also something that will be cool, and we something that we definitely want to add.
I have some questions around kind of like building on that in terms of like competition and valuations and like these kinds of things, right? I mean, firstly, you're actually younger than I am, right? How old are you again?
I turned 22. Uh,
Yeah, crazy, bro. Wait, so I think firstly you should give a little intro as to how you actually got into this
yeah,
because I think it's
sure.
like pretty unique, right?
Yeah, so I mean, I sort of started dabbling around with Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies back in 2020. I sort of started my journey into crypto. Before that, I was just I guess just trading on the stock market, looking into different things that I can invest to and so on. But then when I got into Bitcoin as my first cryptocurrency, and then researched about the technology because obviously I wanted to invest into things where I believe in long term. I realized like how big this opportunity is because it's like literally just like not a new company, it's a new financial ecosystem, and it's like the it's a completely new tech that so much stuff can be built on. So yeah, I started researching more and more, and then at that time also NFTs were quite new, so I got into NFTs a little bit, researched about the use cases for NFTs, and I was like massively bullish on just the idea of having a digital certificate of ownership on the blockchain. Like that was really what caught my attention because I knew how sort of messed up it is that, especially coming from Germany, like in Germany, there are a lot of shops where you can't even pay with credit card right now. Like it's like literally half of the city is cash
Yeah,
only.
I
And
was
it's like,
so surprised.
dude,
I was there last year and I was like, I'm so surprised how the quote unquote most efficient nation like doesn't take Apple Pay. Like, what the fuck?
exactly, exactly. And then yeah, sort of like same thing for property, like real estate and so on. I was always seeing my dad with like these like just stacks of paper on his desk, and I was like, dude, why the fuck are you using paper so much? Like, just use a computer, like every normal human being. And he was like, yeah, no, half of this stuff is like stuff that doesn't exist digitally or whatever. And then yeah, just sort of like getting this picture of like how behind the curve the financial ecosystem is, especially when it comes to ownership, and then seeing how the blockchain could solve ownership was really what fascinated me. So yeah, I just looked into it, was bullish on it, and I was like, hey, let's just do NFTs on our own to learn more about it, to learn really how it works, how to create them, and so on. So I hit up a good friend of mine from school. He is like a great artist, so I was like, "Hey, come join me. Let's do an NFT collection together." So we did that on Stacks. I was at that time again like researching all of the blockchains. I was really fascinated about Bitcoin because I thought like this is sort of the most long-term vision thing, which is like completely decentralized and so on. And then Stacks was this programmable sidechain of Bitcoin, very, very small at that time when we started, but I was really bullish on just use case on Bitcoin. So we did that, and then it was like, okay, cool. We've done that. Now we have a shit ton of NFTs in our wallet. I still need liquidity. Like,
Mm.
should I sell my NFTs again now, or like, what's the use case here? So then we were sort of like brainstorming about like, what can we actually do with it? Thought about the lending idea, and then yeah, went through a startup program, Bitcoin Startup Lab, and learned how to sort of like build a company, fundraise, and everything. And that's how Liquidium started. Actually, at that time, we were building the first NFT lending platform on Stacks. That was in 2022. And then in January of 2023, we heard about Ordinals. That was like extremely early in the Ordinal days when we were just like trading on Google Sheets, uh, in like multiple
Yeah, of
Bitcoins,
course.
whatever. But then we were like, okay, we want to build this on layer one Bitcoin. We're bullish on Bitcoin. So now if we have the option to do it on Bitcoin, let's do it. Yeah. And that was like obviously a big challenge because none of this stuff existed on Bitcoin and you don't have smart contracts and so on. So we had to research a lot about just like Bitcoin core functionality and how we can actually pull this thing off. But yeah, we managed to do so and build it throughout the year of 2023.
Yeah, and you sort of assembled a pretty kick-ass team. You
Yeah.
raised some
And then
money,
also,
right?
what I forgot to mention is at that time, like during the whole time, basically, I was in school studying design and management, UI design and management. But then once we raised funds, I was like, fuck this shit. I learned more doing my startup, so let's just drop out.
Yeah, I completely agree.
And now I'm full time.
And obviously, like, it's impressive, right? That you assemble the team, you raise the money, right? And the fact that you were able to raise over 1 mil, I think, is like a good sign that there's people that believe in this, right? Whether they just want a slice of the ordinal space or not. But I think from what I've seen so far, you guys have seemed like one of the only effectively, even if it's ordinals as collateral, as you expand to runes, it's pretty safe to say that you guys are effectively going to be like, you are and will be most likely the leading money market effectively on Bitcoin, right? Like, it looks like from stats, you guys have been doing pretty much over like 60 Bitcoin a week in volume, right? Since about February, which is like pretty crazy. So it's like consistent kind of like levels for the last like 2 months. Um, I wonder when you were raising that money and just generally, what were you kind of selling people on the long term kind of potential or size of a market like this? Because I would imagine that you're one of the few people who actually like had to put together some stats around this and have like an educated answer as to like what you see number wise as like the future of not only kind of Liquidium but maybe the general money market sort of capacity and growth potential on Bitcoin basically.
Yeah. So yeah, regarding like I think in the beginning, it was definitely hard because nobody, like no investor we talked to even knew about ordinals. And we tried to sell them a vision of what, um,
It's different now,
uh,
right?
yeah, like we were like basically you have like half an hour to talk to investors, right? Like you're on a call with them, and then you try to explain them like here's a pain point and here's how we solve it. But if you spend 20 minutes of this meeting explaining ordinals, you're suddenly in this position where you have to explain here is the pain point of Ethereum NFTs and Bitcoin. Here is why we need ordinals. And now, when we have ordinals, here's the pain point with ordinals. And this is why we need a solution for it. It's
Niche,
like,
niche within a niche.
yeah, thinking in two steps. And I think most investors just don't like to think in two steps. It's just like, okay, we have a pain point right now and we need a solution for it, which makes sense. Like, that's very obvious. But we were already expecting ordinals to blow up and be a massive market. So we knew what the pain point will be. And yeah, that's sort of like that was the beginning, the struggles in the beginning for fundraising. But then sort of throughout time, we just decided in the beginning to take some angel investors in, um, who actually were in the space, like for example, BitGod, Domo, and a bunch of other guys who were very early in the space, um, came into our round, and then sort of from there, once Ordinals got hype, we also closed some VCs throughout the year of 2023. In 2023, we raised around $2 million, and then in this year we raised another 4 million, so totaling 6 now. But now we're at the point sort of where it goes back to the basics, where we're an ordinal company now, which is still a new space. We're sitting at a valuation of something like $80 million. And now investors are like, we don't know, maybe a competitor will come and be bigger than you, or like whatever, just finding some excuses, or like thinking again, don't comprehending how massive this market can be. Whereas all of the people that are actually in the space, they totally get it. Like, Bitcoin assets will be massive. It's so obvious because you have all of the liquidity from other chains flowing into Bitcoin right now, and you have so many large Bitcoin holders who basically have infinite capital and will just back everything that is on Bitcoin. So it's just obvious, and we have been seeing this market progress. And in hindsight, it will be obvious. In hindsight, it was obvious that Ordinals were going to make it, but just people have a tendency to not to always think we're at the top right now. We're going back to the basics sort of, and we just like closed a bunch of or like talked to a bunch of people who are actually in the space and actually Liquidium holders who have invested personally into Liquidium now. And then obviously we do have a bunch of VCs as well, but Liquidium is for the people. We want the people in. Yeah, so that's a fundraising journey.
Do you see kind of any like other competition already cropping up that you're like you feel like you need to be aware of? Because from what I've seen, there's not too much, right?
Well,
Not
yeah,
yet,
I
at
mean, we,
least.
we have seen competition come and go. A lot of them have been trying to, since building on Bitcoin is very difficult, especially if you want to do it to a magnitude where we are doing it, and you also want it to be non-custodial and trustless or trust minimized. Um, so most of the companies that have tried to do a similar product, they just used bridged assets or wrapped assets on other chains, which didn't go well because people they just want to use their wallet to buy it on Magic Eden, and then like they use their Xverse wallet to buy it on Magic Eden, and then they want to use the same wallet on the same chain to borrow against it, and it's like it doesn't make sense to wrap it to ETH, use MetaMask, connect to a completely different service and whatever. Like it just doesn't make sense. Too many steps, too complicated. I'm a sucker for a good user experience, so I always try to cut it down to as little steps as possible. Like on Liquidium, you can get a loan in 3 clicks. Like that's really what I
Hmm.
like. I was like, okay, how can we reduce the amount of work even more? To the point that
It's almost
now it's just
almost
like
like you did a UI. It's almost like you did a UI degree, bro.
yeah, right.
But I,
Yeah.
I, I completely agree there. But yeah,
So yeah, and then like all of these potential competitors failed. I mean, obviously there are some companies that are still like trying to ramp up something. They have been telling that for months now, and like we haven't seen anything. Some of them also shut down again or like pivoted to other ideas. I think it's hard because the lending space is very, very much about liquidity. And since we do have all of the liquidity in the market, it will be very hard to capture a market share from it. Um, I would
I
love
think
some
you
help.
guys are kind of you're like early Aave, right? Because I think it's interesting that these VCs are doubting you, considering the fact that on Ethereum and every other chain, money markets is like one of the go-to and biggest TVL securing things. And on no other chain is there really just like one powerhouse and that's it. Yeah, maybe like right at the start in the super early days, but like for example, things like Curve and Aave are by no means the like best platforms from a tech or innovation, or UI or anything really perspective these days. Yet they still hold the majority of that size, even if maybe there are like better things that have come along since then. So it's like regardless of whether you guys, I'm sure knowing you and the team, you guys are going to continue to innovate and have great products, right? But regardless of that, you're always going to have this like huge part of like the market share now, right? Just by being a first mover and doing a really good job of it, right? And I think like competition is good because it will drive you and others to basically innovate more and like effectively build in like more composable blocks of this liquidity basically and using that within the Bitcoin and other ecosystems I'm sure as well.
Yeah, no, 100%, 100%. Yeah, liquidity will win in the market, and it will be very hard to capture liquidity. But regardless, our focus is to create the best product. Like, no matter if we have a strategic advantage, I want to have competition. Like, I really want to have competition in the space because I think competition speeds up innovation because people will be copying stuff from us. Uh, we can sort of draw inspiration from somewhere else and so on and so forth. So it's just, yeah, I guess always a good thing to have competition. But we will definitely, we're here to stay. We are here to keep innovating in the space for sure.
Hell yeah. The last thing I want to ask you, I guess, is your thoughts on kind of the L2, the Bitcoin L2 space. Like, interestingly, you said you actually started off on Stacks, right? And they've obviously got the Nakamoto upgrade coming up soon, which should be pretty big. Some smart people I know think that's going to be the winner just because of the fact that they've been around for so long and they're actually like more experienced than everyone else, right? You speak to the complexities of actually building on Bitcoin. Interested to just kind of just like hear your, in a brief, very briefly, your thoughts on the kind of Bitcoin L2 space, because there's a lot of different ways. Like every project has a different approach, every chain has a different approach. What do you kind of think at least will win out, having spoken to everyone, and how does that kind of, what are the implications of that for Liquidium?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think layer twos. So I just told you about the problem that I saw in most borrowing and lending protocols that were trying to replicate what we're doing. They were building on other chains, and the problem with most layer twos and so on is that there is always a component of wrapping or bridging involved, which, first of all, you need to be technical to understand it. Second of all, sometimes you even need a new wallet. And it's just like the compatibility is not great. And you also split up liquidity. Like that's actually a big one because Bitcoin is only so effective because you have a massive pool of liquidity. Like you have a massive pool of Bitcoin and capital just sitting in wallets, whereas other chains or layer twos or whatever, they have to capture liquidity first. They have to capture capital first. I think Merlin is doing that really well by like incentivizing capital to come in. But Merlin by no means is as big as Bitcoin and will never be as big as Bitcoin. So the layer two is the alpha, in my opinion. It's like we saw this playing out on other chains as well, like Ethereum. Even though in a bull market, transaction fees can reach $100 plus, the value will still be on the layer two. And since we're focusing on um, on sort of high value assets that you can actually collateralize, for us, layer one is a very, very solid option. Um, for other products, I think there is definitely a future for layer twos. I think I'm bullish on stacks. I think the ecosystem is great. I personally I love the community and everything and what everybody's working on. I think it is a chain where like if you need low transaction fees, high speed, and so on, yes, a layer two will be good for that. Similar to how yes, Lightning is good for everyday payments, but Lightning is definitely not the solution for high value stuff. So I think yeah, like layer one will always be the backbone, and we are going to stick to the backbone. Obviously, if there is a very good chain at some point where the interoperability is very good, we are interested to look into that as well. But the focus for us is to stay on the mother chain.
Yeah, no, I think that completely makes sense. But I think that you guys are in an interesting position whereby because you have so much liquidity, and if you are the winning market, like money market on Bitcoin, you effectively maybe like if from a technological standpoint can be done, you could leverage that liquidity maybe on other chains, lending out other chains. I don't know, maybe it's too complex, but at least at this stage, but could be interesting for sure. One little just like fun question I wanted to ask was is there any reason behind the melting faces, the Liquidium melting faces? What's that about?
But yeah, that was V3. Um, yeah, so we have been like we have gone through like multiple iterations of Liquidium, obviously. Um, Launched our earliest version back in July of 2023. That was the first Ordinal Lending experience you could get. It was trash. It was really shitty, like really slow, just very complex UI. We have improved a lot since then. Um, and then V2 was sort of an iteration of V1. It was like us changing the whole mechanism and the whole flow but it was still the same code base of V1, which means it also just ran on Firebase and was like extremely slow because of the cloud functions and everything. So it was like just not a great user experience yet in terms of speed and also reliability. And then also like the feature set was pretty like basic, because we just wanted to get something to market quick in order to validate if this is really a product that people want and that we can iterate fast. Obviously, Liquidium V2 brought us in like $40 million, which is a significant sum. And
Do
we
you
will
mean in
always.
fees or TVL?
No, just in volume. Just in volume.
Okay, just making sure. I was like, otherwise that'd be crazy. I didn't
Oh
think
yeah.
so.
And obviously, like we still love what V2 was, but V3 was a project that we started in November of last year, and we essentially wrote the first line of code again. Like we wrote everything from scratch again. It's an entirely new code base on a new tech stack, everything from the ground up built new, fully custom backend and everything. And it's so much faster. It's so much more reliable. It's like literally like using a Web2 application, but it's actually Web3 on Bitcoin. You know what I'm saying? Like
Mm.
that's just straight up melting faces. And
Yeah. Okay. All right. Cool. Cool.
once it came out, people were like, "Oh yeah, this literally melted my face when I was using it." So I'm glad to see that. But yeah, V3 is definitely something we're very proud of, and which is something that has been taking up a lot of time from us, in order to just make it the best platform ever.
Hell yeah. Yeah. I mean, like whether it be this, like I've spoken to so many projects and in projects I've worked with myself, where it comes to like at the end of the day, you got to build everything in house from the ground up. So there's actually like composable enough that you can do and innovate more in the future, right? So
Exactly.
yeah, I think it's pretty cool, and the platform's super clean. So and it serves its job, and I think that like the volumes that you guys are achieving kind of are a great like testament to that, right? But yeah, I think that's pretty much all my main questions. Maybe just if there's anything that you want to say or anything you're particularly interested in the Bitcoin space you want to talk about, or otherwise we can kind of leave it there.
So yeah, there's one note I can give on sort of just related to layer twos. I don't have a lot of time left, but there is something called, so the big problem with Bitcoin and why there could actually be a need for layer twos compared to Ethereum is Ethereum has all of the programmability, and layer twos are literally just for speed and transaction fees. On Bitcoin, Bitcoin is very limited in what it can do. It doesn't have as much programmability as other chains. So a layer two can solve programmability, speed, and transaction fees. However, speed and transaction fees always come at the cost of less decentralization, less security, and so on. Um, so the key part that is really needed on layer one Bitcoin is programmability. Um, and we have been working with not a layer two, but more of a Turing complete smart contract validation system outside of Bitcoin that is actually settling and executing everything on layer one Bitcoin for a while now, which will enable um, a lot of new features on Bitcoin. And especially also in the context of borrowing and lending, like, for example, things like liquidity pools, um, and like just smart contracts. Like it makes smart
The
contracts on
future
Bitcoin possible.
the future of NFT-Fi basically on Bitcoin.
Exactly. And yeah, we have been building with them for a while now, sort of like innovating in a lot of spaces, or places, and we're going to roll like a tested version with their tech out in the next couple of weeks, um, and then sort of seeing if we can actually build more programmable stuff, like even better stuff on layer one Bitcoin. So that's something I'm bullish on. It's called the Arch Network. If somebody wants to read more on that, But yeah, it's still early stages. I'm bullish on it, but let's see how this turns out. And then obviously, like Bitcoin is so early, like there's so much stuff we can still build on it.
Hell yeah, yeah, it's gonna be exciting coming into halving post runes launch. And yeah, maybe we'll revisit in the future with Liquidium V4 and God knows what else you guys would have done by then. But yeah, appreciate it. Thank you very much for coming on. Appreciate the time, and I hope this has been useful for some people. You know what I mean? Give them a bit of context and get to know you a little bit and the rest of the Liquidium team. I'm sure.
Cool.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.